Ben Thomas heard Ann Jones in the park yesterday. If you saw that sentence in the newspaper, what would you think? And how would Ann Jones feel knowing that her name was publicly known among all the readers of this journal? John Smith always lies, and that's why nobody likes him. And what about this one? Can a journalist write this in his article? Everyone prefers the smell of a cake to a smell of a flower. Is this even true? I'm sure it's an over-exaggeration. I think this short introduction made you realize what is the subject of my speech, and that is journalism ethics. So let's start with explaining what it actually is. Journalism ethics is a set of rules that each journalist has to obey in order to make their articles or any form of publication true and respectful. It also explains how they're supposed to act while gaining information. Before I explain all of those rules, I will differentiate the press law from the rules suggested by the Polish Council of Media Ethics. The law is more structured and it concerns more aspects of journalism, while the ethical rules are the ones a journalist needs to value himself or herself. Both of those sources are deeply connected, so we won't separate them. The rules of journalism ethics are very universal and they're cherished as the foundation of free media. So here are the most important ones, presented by the Polish Council of Media Ethics. 1. The rule of truth, which means that every information needs to be checked before publishing, given in the right context, and simply true. 2. The rule of objectivity. A journalist must present information no matter what is his personal view on them. 3. The rule of integrity, which means working ethically, not being bribed. 4, the rule of freedom and responsibility, which says that the journalist is responsible for everything he publishes. Another rule is the rule of respect and tolerance. A journalist must respect other people's privacy and dignity. Another rule is about separating your personal opinion from the facts, so that the reader is able to differentiate facts and opinions. The last rule is caring about the well-being of the audience. The audience's rights are more important than the business of press or of a journalist. Of course, the goal of journalism ethics is to create mutual respect between the reader, between the society, and the journalists. The journalists, they serve the country by giving them true information and objectivity. So then the well-being of a society is then their first purpose. And of course, there are many dilemmas concerning journalism ethics. For example, can a journalist act unethically in order to get some important information? Is Machiavellism acceptable? The answer to this question is no, because first of all, a journalist must remember that the ends don't justify the means. And it's not a written rule, but rather a norm that should be followed by every journalist who is aware of the importance of his work. Another question is about the influence that the journalist can have on a society and its beliefs. Can you add your personal opinion to your article? And here the answer is not that simple. First, the main and I think very reasonable rule is that an article can't contain any statements supporting or justifying war, evil, hate, etc. At the same time, a journalist must remember about the sixth rule from those suggested by the Polish Council of Media Ethics, which says that a reader must be able to differentiate facts from opinions. And of course, it's not always so black and white, and as we can read on this council's internet page, there are many situations in which journalists mix their opinions with facts, not allowing the readers, viewers, listeners, or anyone to differentiate them. And it's a very common action used to convince people, like propaganda, for example. Another dilemma concerns influencers. Are they journalists? To answer this question, we have to search for a definition of a journalist. By Polish press law, it's a person creating, editing, and preparing articles employed by the press and working by its empowerment. 5 conditions. The influencers, they don't work for the press. So technically and legally, no, they aren't journalists. But we can't forget that what they do actually is sharing information, not always the true ones, and publishing statements that have a gigantic influence on readers. Besides, the Polish press law was created around 40 years ago, so I think it doesn't really reflect on the current situation in which everyone can become a blogger using the internet. And also, yes, it has been amended several times, but even though I think it still isn't on point. But even though the influencers aren't subject to the press law, it shouldn't stop them from working by its rules. That's why there are many tips and advice, like the ones presented by the Office of Consumer Competition Protection that give instructions to influencers about the legal aspect of their work. The office, for example, teaches the consumers about their rights, explains the proper use of marketing hashtags, monitors the socials, and punishes when someone is working against the rule of media. The purpose of this office is very wide, and it doesn't concern only the few aspects that I mentioned. And I think what's worth noticing is that most of those tips and advice, they concern the marketing, advertising aspect of being an influencer. So they don't broach the subject of an influencer being influential, encouraging people to do something, or just publishing statements that have, again, influence on readers. I think with this conclusion, we can think that they still aren't considered as strong mind-shaping media, like the press. And I think that, in fact, we might underestimate the power that social media has. And as we inevitably come closer to the end of my speech, I would like to return one more time to the examples from the beginning. How can we transform them to make them legally acceptable, more objective? Let's take the first one. Ben Thomas heard Ann Jones in the park yesterday. The goal of journalism ethics now is not to completely stop this information from being published, but to transform it, to make it more objective and respectful towards the victim. We want the audience to know about the situation, for example, in order to prevent some similar situations in the future, or just let people know of what's going on in their city. So the ideal form of this sentence would be, for example, a woman was attacked in a park yesterday. The police suspect Ben T. We don't have any specific information yet, or something similar. What's important is that we can't accuse anyone of doing anything as long as the police or a court don't say so. We can't reveal a name of a victim if he or she doesn't agree on that. Okay, so let's talk again about the last example from those from the beginning. Everyone prefers the smell of a cake to a smell of a flower. This one sounds completely irrational, because of the lack of any source that would support the statistics. So, what a journalist should do first is, of course, verify the credibility of the source. And then, again, I can't stress this enough, every information needs to be given in the right context. Maybe this information can be true when we know that all the examined people from the statistics were allergic to flowers. Why not? What I've been trying to show you for the last few minutes is that being a journalist comes with many dilemmas, and very often there is no one simple answer to all of them. But I think it's a guarantee of free media, so that's why it's, of course, very important. And journalism ethics is a set of rules that is followed only by professional journalists. But in fact, I think those rules represent the desirable behavior of every person who is respectful towards the other people, respects their privacy, their rights. So maybe we should all learn to live by those rules. The world would be a better place. Thank you.